One of my professors in college used to tell me he wanted me to become a professor, and he said, the last thing you want to do is get out in the real life world of thunder and lightning. You could get hurt out there. And he said, you should be a college professor. And I think for a lot of people that are legislators, that's the world they live in, this kind of cloistered, protected world where they make laws, but they don't have to live by the laws that they make. And I think that's not what we want. I think we want a citizen legislature of people who have real experiences in life, serve for a season, and go home.
So how did you end up in Tennessee? It's you've been here for a little while, right?
Right. Born here, 1965, eighth generation Tennessean. So my family got here a long time ago, 1790. John and Ann Lancaster and their 11 children came here to take up a Revolutionary War grant, sight unseen, brought all their belongings and struck out to what was then the frontier. And it's one of the neatest things about one of, I guess, the biggest blessings I have is that I get to wake up every day and see the land that my family has farmed for 235 years.
Yeah. So not only have you seen it from the beginning, you're eighth generation from the beginning. And so your family, your grandfather's grandfather, I mean, with the amount of migration we've had into the state, there's not many people that can say that were born in Tennessee, much less an eighth generation family in Tennessee. So that's a real remarkable legacy that your family has.
It is. There are certainly many Tennesseans who have a legacy that's that long or longer, but it does give you perspective. And for me, I think that's what it really gives me, because I can't help but think as I look across my farm and I think about when they showed up and imagine what it might have looked like then, the challenges they faced. One of John's and Ann's son, Richard, got scalped by Indians, survived. And that was a story that I heard as a kid growing up. And by the time I got to be in college, I kind of decided, well, that story might not be true. That, may be a family lore. But back in the early 2000s, my oldest sister, Cindy, and I were working on documenting the history of the farm to qualify our farm as a pioneer farm, which means it predates the establishment of Tennessee. And we came across a medical journal article about Richard Lancaster and authenticating in a contemporary time frame that a doctor who was passing through ran into him and wrote a medical journal article about entitled the Treatment of the Scalped Head. Wow. And so we were kind of blown away because we had both kind of concluded, yeah, it's probably not true, but it actually was true. And we have the benefit of hearing this assessment of Richard and what he had gone through. So, when you have that perspective and you see that, and the struggles that they went through, it kind of puts the challenges that we face today in better perspective, right? Yeah. So life is a lot easier on us today, truthfully. And then it causes me to think about 235 years from now, what will the people here then, if we're lucky enough that they're my ancestors and they are my progeny, what will they be thinking about what I did, what we did?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, what a great way to kick off our podcast. And we're very excited to welcome you to Rutherford County and to the Rutherford County GOP podcast. And just super honored to have Congressman John Rose with us, 6th Congressional District Congressman since 2019.
That's right. January 3rd.
Yeah, and as you've already heard, 8th generation Tennessean, small business owner, farmer, conservative leader, former commissioner of ag for our great state. Really and truly known for your commitment to protecting Tennessee values and supporting small businesses and farming, which a lot of people don't realize. When you look at our state seal, it's agriculture, and so. And just standing for constitutional freedom. So welcome to our
Good
podcast.
To be with you. Yeah, and agriculture is still the most important industry in Tennessee. It's been that way since the beginning. It's still that way today. We've got a proud legacy there, and we need to continue to foster the development of successful farming and agriculture in Tennessee.
Well, I didn't realize this. I had the high honor of getting to serve alongside Governor Lee in his administration, and one of the initiatives that he worked on was, supporting our rural communities. And, we don't really realize, especially those of us that live in Middle Tennessee near Nashville, how rural our state is. I mean, 64% of our state is rural. And so how do you see the impact of that as someone who's seeking the governor's office, especially with your experience with agriculture and having served as commissioner of ag for our state?
Sure. Well, I think there's a tendency to be kind of transfixed by the urban areas where the high growth is occurring, and perhaps sometimes forget the rural areas of our state, particularly as you move away from Middle Tennessee. And that's one of the things I hear from folks in far East Tennessee and far West Tennessee is they sometimes feel forgotten.
Yeah.
And so if we want Tennessee to prosper, we kind of have to bring the entire state along, which means we need to be thinking proactively. And I know Governor Lee has worked on that, trying to winnow down the number of distressed counties in our state, all of which are in rural areas, and they've had some success at that. And I think you have to be intentional about that.
You do, yeah.
Obviously, some businesses are going to naturally gravitate to urban areas, but when we can recruit businesses or inspire or foster the development of businesses in rural areas, that's good for Tennessee.
Yeah. Well, I resonate with that because I grew up in rural West Tennessee. Bolivar is my hometown, and then went to school in Knoxville, and I've been here since, I guess 2012, more or less. And so, often, I mean, our folks in West Tennessee do feel really left behind and think, Nashville gets everything. And so there's a real hard balance there on that with you just hit the nail on the head with a lot of times businesses want to go to the urban areas. So how do you balance, that mindset with, trying to recruit business and opportunity to those rural areas, which obviously I think Blue Oval over there in West Tennessee was a generational thing for a lot of those folks. And very well may, be something that you'll have the opportunity to work on as governor as well, because it won't be done by next August.
Yeah. Well, Congressman, if I can jump in for a second, one way I have seen you work is through your broadband stuff. And I know I'm on the board at Middle Tennessee Electric, and you have been a huge champion while in Congress for helping us expand broadband. You wouldn't believe the number of areas in Middle Tennessee that don't have broadband coverage. And, I think during COVID, we certainly experienced what that was like for students that had to go home and learn from home. If the family didn't have internet, there was not a whole lot of learning going on. And you think about Johnny at being at home and not being able to have internet when he's in school. What does Johnny do 10 years down the line when he needs his first job? Does industry come to those parts of the state? And so I know you have been a big champion about that. I would love to hear some of your thoughts about the broadband expansion.
Sure. Well, infrastructure, and I would include within that broadband and mobile or cellular service, are critical. And I think we've all had the experience of driving across Tennessee and not being able to get cell service. And that's not good for business. It's not good for people generally that want to stay in touch, but it's particularly hard on business because if you can't keep a call, then you can't call a client or make a sale or solve business problems. And so we've got to be focused on that. But broadband in particular, I think, is really the key to the future. It allows people to work remotely, live where they want to live, and still be connected. And so we've done a pretty good job in Tennessee. There's still more to do. And interestingly, because of the impact of rural telephone cooperatives and electric cooperatives serving those rural areas, we've probably done better in Tennessee in the more rural areas. So in my district, we have several counties that are 100%, gigabit communities. And that's happened because the local member-owned co-ops have stepped forward to do that. And so interestingly, we have the challenge that sometimes it's communities like Rutherford County that have had incumbent service providers that just haven't gotten the job done, where you find gaps that stand in the way of people being interconnected. And that's not a one and done proposition. A lot of people say, well, we've got the state wired up, we're done. But that's going to continue to evolve and improve, and new technology is going to come along. So we've got to stay on the cutting edge of that and make sure that, one of the things that I've recently supported is trying to make a couple of communities in the 6th district to bring quantum networks to those communities, which will be like the next standard for connectivity. And we want to keep Tennessee on the cutting edge of that, because it will open opportunities for folks to return from wherever they are in the world to work here if they're from here, or come here if they're just moving here. And one of the counties in my district, White County, talks about, we live where we recreate. And we've got beautiful communities, beautiful terrain, white waters, et cetera, that people love to enjoy themselves. If they can come and live there, enjoy all those things, and bring their job with them, that's good for our rural communities. And that's really the best way to make these communities successful. And that's one of the, benefits, kind of unintended, unexpected benefits from COVID, is that a lot of people figured out they could come home and work remotely and be successful.
Yeah. And move here from other states.
That's right. That's right.
I want to jump into a lot of the things you've done here in here recently in your role as a congressman. But before we do that, I want to back up for a minute and talk a little bit about your family. You have two young boys. Tell us. I don't want to spill it. Tell us a little bit about your family and kind of some background here. Well, who's John Rose?
As I kind of talk about my life, I was a workaholic as a kid, as a young person, and was able to build a successful business from the idea stage to success, create scores of jobs in the IT space, where I had no experience at all, no training at all, but that's turned out to be where my success in life came from.
Tennessee likes to elect business leaders as governors.
That's true. That's true, and it's that experience that I would point to as I think what qualifies me for the next adventure that I'm pursuing. But it had been my goal since I was probably 8 or 10 to continue the family farm tradition, that 235-year legacy, less years then. But and I'm the youngest of 4 children, so I was trying to figure out how I was going to do that. So I was very focused on succeeding so that I financially could accomplish that goal. And I did accomplish that goal. When I was 37, I was able to buy the farm, and my siblings embraced that. And then I woke up one day and realized, I've got the farm part of the family farm solved, but not the family part. And so I started to think about that. And I'd like to say I found my wife, but the truth is she found me.
Yeah, you picked the perfect partner, also interested in farming.
That's right. That's right. And so we have been blessed. We've been married almost 15 years. Have got 2 just, wonderful sons, Guy and Sam. And hoping that I tell them all the time, no pressure, just 235-year unbroken streak here that we hope y'all will continue. So
no pressure.
They don't get that yet, but they will, because that's what my dad did to me. So I'm kind of passing on the family history there. But have been very blessed, and I got started late in life. And there are good and bad points to that, obviously.
Hang on one second. Let's talk about these boys. You've got 2 boys, and I think America has an affinity for Guy. Yeah. We have a great story I want to share. I'd love to show the video here in a minute, but tell us a little bit about Guy. And you're taking him to Washington. I think Chelsea was not there that day.
That's right.
You mind sharing that story with us?
So Guy had this happened in June of 2024. Guy had just graduated from kindergarten the week before. And Chelsea said, why don't you take him to Washington with you? He's old enough that he can, follow directions, and he can be good, and it'll all work. And so I was like, sure, that's fine. So we flew up to Washington on a Monday morning, and I had to give a speech on the House floor that morning. It was the Monday following President Trump's conviction on some charges in New York. And so I had a really fiery, kind of hard-hitting speech about that. So I took Guy with me to the floor, and as I was sitting there waiting for my opportunity to speak, it occurred to me that if I gave the speech up in the seating where the manager's table is, that Guy could sit behind me. You've seen speakers at that vantage point. If Guy sat behind me, he would be seen in the shot. And so I said, hey, Guy, why don't you go sit behind me? And when I start speaking, we'll be on TV, and you can smile at your little brother. And so I texted Chelsea and said, hey, I'm going to be giving the speech, and Guy's going to be sitting behind me, and you should get Sam to watch it. And so Guy was, pretty excited about that, seemed like. And so I, of course, I get into the moment, stand up, start giving my speech, and don't really think anything else about it. Wasn't thinking about Guy. what he was doing. And so I give this
Your
speech
phone
and
starts buzzing.
I knew that it was a speech that would likely get me admonished by the chair, because there's a few things you're not supposed to say, and it's kind of silly. Some of them silly. But I knew, I'm probably going to get called down by the Speaker Pro Tem here. And sure enough, that happened. So as I'm leaving the House floor with Guy, I'm thinking about that and kind of watching and waiting for the House Speaker Pro Tem to say, speakers are reminded not to engage in personalities when speaking on the House floor. And that's exactly what the Speaker Pro Tem said. But as I'm getting ready to walk out the door, one of the floor managers grabs me by the shoulder and he leans over and he says, "You're going to want to watch that video." and so I'm first thinking, oh my gosh, did I say, did I say something I didn't mean to say, and I'm like, did I say something out of space? And I knew he wouldn't care about what I was getting admonished for. And he said, "Oh, it's not about you." And so I kind of wheel around and look at Guy, and he just has this big old grin on his face, so he knew, that he had engaged in some mischief. And so by the time it's about a 10-minute walk back to my office. When I walk in the door, my comms director is at the door, kind of white-faced, and he says, "I've come up with 2 statements for what we can say." And I'm like, "What happened?" And I had been quizzing Guy, but he was kind of mum about it, and he said, "Well, you're going to want to see the video." And I said, I understand that. And I said, "But we should just say I told him to smile for the cameras." and he said, "Oh, he did a lot more than smile." So that was. And I honestly thought this probably not going to get that much play. But by that time, 10 minutes later, C-SPAN had already put it up on social media, and it was just taking off like wildfire. We already had calls from all the major media outlets saying, "Does the Congressman have any comment on his sons?"
That's so funny, because as I was taking my girls to school this morning, we were talking about our day and what we were doing for the day. And I said, "I'm going to sit down with Congressman Rose. We're going to have a podcast today." And they said, "Who's Congressman Rose?" And we were talking about, I said, "Do you remember the video of the young boy that was sitting with his father in Congress?" And they were like, "Oh yeah, we love that video." And so Guy is a celebrity in our household. So I'm sure he has others.
And so, the remarkable thing is still just kind of hard to believe, but in the 10 days after that got 12 billion views.
Wow. On
social media.
Wow.
And of course we did a lot of interviews and stuff. We just cut it off after a couple of days because it was just never going to end. And but it's just amazing. Still to this day, people recognize him and ask him about it. And we were traveling overseas in July after that happened in June, and there was a family from India of all places. We were actually in the Parliament building in London, and we saw them across the room, and they were whispering and looking our way, and it was clear they were talking about us. And then they kind of got up the nerve and came over, and the father said, were you on TV? And so they had seen this in India.
That's crazy.
And so it's just remarkable how widely it spread.
So what is it like being in Congress, being in Washington with a young family? Has that been a challenge? Like, how do you do that?
Well, it can be a challenge just in terms of the time commitment. But since Guy started school, Chelsea and the boys stay here, and I travel back and forth, and that's what we always did. So we never lived in Washington. I've got an apartment there, but we always came home as soon as the house recesses. We come home, and that's what I do now. And occasionally Chelsea and the boys will come up if their schedule allows it, but mostly it's me going and doing the work that I've taken on and then coming home.
Well, I didn't mean to sidetrack what we were talking about your business, but I wanted to hear that story again about Guy and the time y'all had in Washington together. I'm sure that's a story y'all will share.
Well, he gets all that personality from Chelsea, and I got a letter. This is probably last August, September, so 2 or 3 months after this happened, from a lady. She was, I think, 85 in Texas. Never met her, don't know her. She had seen that, somehow figured out how to mail me, and wrote a handwritten letter and said, how much that was encouraging to her and how uplifting she found it. And then she said, she kind of ended it with saying, I suspect that he gets that precociousness from one of his parents. And I was like, yeah, you're right about that. It's Chelsea.
Chelsea, good.
Yeah.
Well, getting back a little bit more to your background as a farmer and small business owner, How has your experience in those places informed or influenced your approach to leadership? Because I think
Sure.
those are important backgrounds and unique for a leader.
Absolutely. And I was blessed to have good mentors growing up. My mom was this teacher and was, very, very good at teaching us how to do things and how to understand things. And my dad was a farmer and a businessman, and my grandfathers were as well. And so, I learned watching them, literally learned at my dad's feet. And he was very good about telling me why things were the way they were. And, I had a kind of voracious appetite for that at a young age. And my mom's father was I guess the classic entrepreneur, had started many businesses and never quit. He just kept going until the very end at, starting new things. And so that kind of got, into my bloodstream. And so, it was kind of natural then that I was thinking about business even as I was going to school, and how could I be successful, looking for ideas, thinking about opportunities. And so, was very blessed in business of building a successful business. I would tell you that experience of working with people, and I got to do that at a very young age. So, I was in my 20s when we started our business, and was 35 when we sold it. And so, in the great scheme of things, a very relatively short period of time in my first business. But the lessons that you learn, and by trial and error, lots of them, to be honest with you. I, again, had good mentors, and even as I was in business, was, had the good sense to call on people to ask for advice about how to deal with certain situations. And so that experience has just been invaluable in Congress, and I think separates members of Congress. Career legislators do not have the perspective oftentimes to understand the impact of what they're doing. And coming from a business environment and having to deal with regulations and government bureaucracy, I think really dials you in on understanding what real America is about. One of my professors in college used to tell me, he wanted me to become a professor, and he said, the last thing you want to do is get out in the real life world of thunder and lightning. You could get hurt out there. And he said, you should be a college professor. And I think for a lot of people that are legislators, that's the world they live in, this kind of cloistered, protected world where they make laws, but they don't have to live by the laws that they make. And I think that's not what we want. I think we want a citizen legislature of people who have real experiences in life, serve for a season, and go home.
That's great. Well, let's pivot a little bit to your time in Congress, kind of along those lines. We were, I guess, maybe off air or not, talking about the recent passage of the Home Buyers Privacy Protection Act that you and Senator Haggerty have championed, and I believe is sitting on President Trump's desk.
That's right. Just arrived there on Monday.
So I'm in real estate, so I help people buy and sell homes, and then I'm also in kind of the commercial world of land development and commercial real estate development. So I know on the home buyer side, my father-in-law, who is actually a banker, recently was like, because they just recently bought a house, he was like, the amount of phone calls since they have pulled my credit for this application I have received is just unruly. So tell us a little bit about what this does and the impact it will have.
So I first became aware of the issue when Colin Barrett at the Tennessee Bankers Association called me, and he said, hey, I just got a call from a banker up in East Tennessee, and they were telling me about what they call trigger leads. The industry, they call them trigger leads. And these are solicitations for business, spam, if you will, that you get, as you described. If you're buying a new home and you're financing it, the moment your prospective lender pulls a hard credit report on you, the 3 credit reporting agencies sell that information to anybody who is willing to pay for it, and you're going to get inundated. And so when I heard that, I was like, yeah, okay, because I hear these kinds of things all the time about government policy and issues that need to be addressed. And so I thought, that sounds like a real issue. We should take it up. And so we started working on it. Probably less than 2 weeks later, I'm walking through the lobby of my bank in Cookeville, And I had been, before I went to Congress, I had been on the board of that bank. And so I knew a lot of the people there. But one of the lenders jumped up, a lady, and she grabbed me and she said, "Congressman Rose, are you aware of trigger leads?" And of course I was like, "Yeah, I am." And I was thinking, but 2 weeks ago, I had no idea what these things were. And so she said, "Let me show you what one of my customers is experiencing." And what I learned from her, and what I've heard many times since, including from fellow members of Congress who've been through this, and family members of my own, is that when that credit report gets pulled, in the next 24 to 48 hours, you may get as many as 100 to 200 mail, email, text, phone call solicitations. And some of them are very misleading. So, you imagine you're a first-time home buyer and you've never been through this process before, and you've just gone to the bank to get a loan, and you get a call that says, "Mr. Rose, I need to talk to you about your loan. It's very important that you call me." Well, you're going to call because, that sounds like, okay, this number looks strange, but, I better check into this. And lots of, iterations of that or just different variations of that. And so it's very oppressive on new home buyers and very just, they're already in a tense, high pressure situation. My sister-in-law just recently bought a home here in Rutherford County, and she got almost 200 in just a little over 24 hours. And so what the bill does is it stops the credit bureaus from selling that information unless the customer opts in. And so it will virtually put a stop to it. There are a couple of exceptions for existing relationships that you have. So if you've got an existing lender, they can continue to market to you. Sure. If you choose to get those solicitations, you can. And that was one of the arguments some people made, not many. Most of the industry was in favor of this because, think about that, you go to your bank and you get your mortgage commitment, and then you start getting these calls. Well, who are you going to suspect?
That banker.
Bank. And so the banks were they want none of that because they're getting chewed out by their customers. And of course, the confusion that ensues. And it's also a potential place for fraud, right? Because, the credit bureaus are not very discerning about who they sell this information to. So, you may get scammed by somebody who is trying to pass them off as somehow related to your transaction. So it's all a good thing. So yeah. And yet I will tell you, even then, with something that should be kind of a home run, and it passed the House unanimously, it passed the Senate unanimously, but it took us 2 years to get that done. So it just kind of tells you the pitfalls of how the legislative process works and how difficult it can be to navigate even what is just common sense policy.
Congressman, I've heard you're a man that burns the candle at both ends, and that first one to get to the office, last one to leave. Tell us a little bit about, you said 2 years to get that through. What did it take? I mean, what does that look like if you're wanting to propose a new bill in Congress today? Sure.
Well, so, there's the kind of initial process of just figuring out what can we do? Right. How can we best accomplish this? And so, we went through 3 or 4 iterations as we kind of dialed in on what made sense. Obviously, we talked to people in the industry trying to figure out how do you do something that, is reasonable in protecting consumers, but doesn't cut them off from information. We don't want to stifle the ability for companies to market their wares. Okay. But, and so, you want to be mindful of that. But in this case, obviously, when the basis for the contact is what should be to some degree your private financial transaction, that shouldn't be the initiator of you getting all this stuff. And so we had to work through that language. We worked with the various industry groups, the bankers, the mortgage bankers, the various mortgage companies that are out there. And we talked to the credit bureaus as well, trying to figure out how could we do this. And so there's that. Then there's the building consensus on the Hill and getting people educated about it. That turned out to be pretty easy. The first time in the last Congress, we got 95 co-sponsors in the House, bipartisan, pretty balanced between Republicans and Democrats. Had a great...
Not something you hear very often, a bipartisan bill in Washington.
Absolutely. No. Maxine Waters voted for our bill. So this tells you the bipartisan nature of this. And we had a great co-sponsor on the Democratic side, Representative Richie Torres from New York, wonderful partner in working on this. This bill really epitomizes good government and the coming together. It passed unanimously in the Senate, as I said, with Jack Reed and Bill Hagerty working together to get it through on the Senate side. And yet, in the last Congress, we could never get a hearing in the committee because the Republican chairman of the House Financial Services Committee didn't want us to get a hearing. So we were just dead in the water. And so those are some of the trials and tribulations you face. And so even this Congress, I ultimately had to enlist the help of Speaker Mike Johnson to get this bill to move through the process. And thankfully, Speaker Johnson was helpful and helped us get this bill to the House floor, and where, of course, it passed unanimously. So.